Have you ever had one of those days where something as simple as ice cream completely changes your mood? That's exactly what happened to me the other day. It started as a casual suggestion from my dad, and before I knew it, we were laughing, reminiscing, and finding ourselves tangled in memories we hadn't even realized we needed to revisit. By the end of the evening, we weren't just sharing dessert. We were sharing pieces of our hearts in a way that felt both unexpected and profoundly comforting. Don't forget, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments which city you are listening from. This is very important for us, and now enjoy listening. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind that feels deceptively ordinary. The sun was slanting lazily through the blinds of my kitchen, dust motes dancing in the warm glow, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee still lingered in the air. I was perched on a high stool at the counter, scrolling through my phone, when Dad, or Kevin as I've always called him, leaned casually against the doorway. There was that subtle ease in the way he stood, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a mug that had seen better days. "Want to go get ice cream?" he asked, almost too casually, but I caught that glint in his eye, that faint trace of mischief he never quite manages to hide. Ice cream? At 3 in the afternoon. I blinked at him, and before I could respond, he had already grabbed his jacket and was jingling the car keys. There was something infectious about his spontaneity. I found myself laughing, shaking my head, and finally saying, "Why not?" We drove down familiar streets, the kind I thought I knew like the back of my hand, but with Kevin in the car, they felt a little more alive. He hummed along to a classic oldies station, and I caught myself smiling at how easily comfortable it was to just sit there, side by side, without pretending or forcing conversation. The ice cream parlor wasn't far, but the moment we stepped inside, the summer warmth outside seemed to fade into a cozy, almost cinematic world of pastel walls and the gentle hum of a freezer. I watched Kevin as he debated over flavors, something he never takes lightly, and realized how little I'd actually paid attention to these small, mundane details before. He was deliberate, patient, and for some reason, watching him choose between mint chocolate chip and salted caramel made me feel closer to him than I had in years. We sat at a small table by the window, the sun now sinking low enough to cast a golden glow across the tiled floor. The first bite of ice cream hit me with that familiar creamy sweetness, but it was more than flavor. It was a memory, a reminder of the simpler joys of life that often get overlooked when days are filled with deadlines, errands, and the humdrum of routine. Kevin laughed at something I said, a deep, full laugh that made my chest ache with warmth. There was a rhythm to our conversation, a flow that felt natural, like picking up a melody after years of silence. Halfway through our cones, he leaned back and said, almost casually, "It's nice to do this. Just nothing together." The words lingered in the air, heavier than the waxed paper beneath our cones. I nodded, not quite sure why, but I felt it too, the unexpected comfort of being fully present, with someone who knew you, flaws and all, and still wanted nothing more than to share a quiet afternoon. On the way back, we didn't speak much, but the silence wasn't awkward. It was reflective, warm, almost like the pause between heartbeats. When we reached home, Kevin suggested we finish the day with Netflix, a casual proposal that felt almost revolutionary after the simple yet profound joy of ice cream. I agreed, and we settled on the couch, blankets draped over our laps, the screen glowing softly in front of us. It was one of those shows you don't need to follow closely to enjoy. We laughed at the ridiculous plot twists, shared knowing looks at familiar tropes, and somewhere in the quiet spaces between episodes, I realized how much I'd missed him, missed just being with someone who cared enough to notice the small joys in life. As the credits rolled on the first episode, I felt a soft ache in my chest, not of sadness, but of recognition. These moments, fleeting and ordinary as they seemed, were the ones that mattered. Kevin turned to me with that half smile, the one that always made me feel like he understood without words. I realized then that sometimes connections aren't about grand gestures or long conversations. They're about ice cream in the afternoon, shared laughter, and the quiet intimacy of simply existing together. By the time the night ended and Kevin headed off to his room, I sat there, wrapped in the blanket, staring at the empty mugs and discarded napkins. There was a glow left in me, a subtle understanding that life's richness often comes from the unexpected, simple choices, and that sometimes a day that starts as ordinary can end in something quietly extraordinary. After that afternoon, something shifted between Kevin and me, though not in a way I could immediately put into words. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet, like noticing the first soft brush of spring on your skin after a long winter. I found myself looking forward to the small moments, those ordinary fragments of time where conversation flowed easily, and laughter seemed to come from the deepest, most comfortable place inside me. The next day, I came home from work to find Kevin in the kitchen again, though this time he wasn't leaning casually in the doorway, he was actually cooking. I paused in the hallway, noticing the way the light from the window spilled over his shoulders, catching his hair at just the right angle. There was a kind of domestic rhythm in the way he moved, chopping vegetables, stirring sauce, humming under his breath. It was ordinary, yes, but also oddly mesmerizing. "You're home early," he said, glancing over his shoulder with that faint grin that always made me feel a little lighter than I had any right to. "Traffic was easy," I replied, though the truth was I'd been looking forward to this moment all day. Something about seeing him like this, the ordinary, domestic Kevin, made the thought of staying home, rather than heading out to errands, feel like the better choice. We ate dinner at the small table near the window, the same one from yesterday, and for a while, we simply talked. Not about anything particularly important, just small observations. A funny incident at the grocery store, a stray dog I'd noticed on my walk that morning, the way the sunset painted the clouds in soft streaks of orange and purple. But even in those trivial exchanges, I felt a deepening connection, as if each word was a small thread weaving us closer together. After dinner, we lingered at the table for a while, neither of us wanting to break the rhythm. Kevin leaned back, fingers tapping lightly on the table, and said softly, "You know, Margaret, I didn't realize how much I'd missed this, just being around you." I blinked at him, startled not by the words themselves, but by the sincerity behind them. "I didn't either," I admitted, feeling a warmth that was entirely different from the casual comfort of yesterday's ice cream outing. This was deeper, more intimate. It wasn't about dessert or Netflix. It was about recognition, about seeing someone and feeling understood without the need for grand gestures. Later, we moved to the couch again, this time under a shared blanket. The evening had grown cooler, and the dim light from the lamp cast gentle shadows across the room. I noticed little things about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the subtle softness in his voice when he spoke to me, the steady, unhurried way he reached for the remote. It was all so familiar, yet somehow more poignant because of the quiet intensity of the moment. We ended up choosing a different show this time, something slow-paced, with long stretches of silence between dialogue. I found I didn't mind the pauses. They felt comfortable, almost necessary. At one point, Kevin reached over to grab a handful of popcorn, and our hands brushed. I felt that brief, electric shiver that comes with an unexpected touch, and caught myself glancing at him, half expecting him to pull away. But he didn't. Instead, he smiled that same gentle, knowing smile, and I realized how much trust was built into something as simple as staying close and letting the other person exist beside you. There was a subtle tension in the air, not uncomfortable, but charged with the potential of something unspoken. We didn't rush to fill it with words or actions. Instead, we let it breathe, letting every laugh, every glance, every quiet sigh deepen our understanding of each other. It was in these shared silences that I realized the real discovery. Connection doesn't have to be loud or grand to be meaningful. Sometimes it's the small, unassuming gestures, the brief touches, the casual conversations over dinner or dessert that reveal the truest parts of a person. By the time the credits rolled on the second episode, I was leaning into him slightly, my shoulder brushing against his, and he made no move to adjust. There was a sense of mutual respect in the way we existed together in that space, a recognition that we could be vulnerable without losing ourselves, that we could explore the subtle emotional intimacy that comes from being present with someone who genuinely cares. Finally, Kevin turned to me and whispered, almost like a confession, "I'm really glad we did this yesterday. And today too." I smiled softly, feeling the same quiet ache from before, the ache that isn't sadness, but a profound awareness of how much ordinary moments can matter. "Me too," I said, and for a long while, we just stayed like that, side by side, letting the warmth of the room, the glow of the screen, and the presence of each other fill the spaces inside us that had felt empty for far too long. And as I drifted to sleep that night, I realized that this wasn't just about ice cream or Netflix. It was about discovering a kind of closeness I hadn't anticipated, a connection that was entirely unexpected, yet exactly what I needed. And somewhere deep down, I felt a quiet certainty that our afternoons, our evenings, our shared silences and laughter were only the beginning of something quietly, profoundly transformative. That weekend felt different, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why at first. Maybe it was the way Kevin had smiled at me over breakfast Saturday morning, the quiet way he poured coffee into my mug before filling his own. Or maybe it was the soft, almost imperceptible way he lingered by the doorway when I was about to leave for errands. Whatever it was, I noticed it immediately, an unspoken awareness that our ordinary routines were quietly shifting, growing more intimate, more attuned. I spent the morning running errands, the streets unusually warm for January, and found myself thinking about Kevin in ways I hadn't expected. I wondered what it was about him that made these small moments, the morning coffee, the shared couch, even the mundane task of picking out ice cream, feel so important. By the time I returned home, I was almost eager for the quiet, for the comfort of simply being with him again. He was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket draped across his lap. The soft glow from the lamp made the room feel like a sanctuary, and for a moment, I just stood in the doorway, taking in the familiar scene, the way he relaxed into the cushions, the soft rise and fall of his chest as he watched some low-key daytime show. He looked up at me, smiled, and that smile felt like a gentle invitation to step into the world we've been quietly building together. "Hey," he said, voice soft, almost cautious, as if he were testing the waters of something unspoken. "Hey," I replied, feeling my chest tighten in a way that was equal parts excitement and nervousness. We spent the next hour in that easy rhythm of conversation and comfortable silence. He laughed at something I said about a neighbor's cat, and I caught myself leaning closer, drawn in by the warmth in his eyes. It wasn't romance in the obvious sense, not yet, but there was something deeply emotional, something quietly magnetic about being so present with him. Later, he suggested we make popcorn and watch a movie. Again, I laughed softly. "At this rate, Netflix is going to think we live here." He grinned, that same mischievous glint in his eyes, and I realized how much I loved that he could make ordinary things feel extraordinary. We settled into the couch, blankets intertwined, and I noticed how naturally our bodies seemed to fit together. My shoulder brushed against his again, and this time there was no hesitation, no awareness of crossing a boundary. It was a simple, human comfort, yet it carried a kind of subtle tension that made my heart beat a little faster. As the movie played, I found myself studying him without meaning to. The slight curve of his lips when he smiled, the way his brow furrowed in concentration during a dramatic scene, the way his fingers absent-mindedly traced patterns on the blanket. I realized then that I was learning him in a way I hadn't thought possible. Not just what he said or how he acted, but the quiet, subtle ways he existed in the world, the nuances that made him Kevin. Halfway through the movie, there was a scene that unexpectedly resonated with me. A quiet, emotional moment between two characters who had been tiptoeing around their feelings for years. I glanced at Kevin, and for a heartbeat, our eyes met. There was a flicker of something unspoken there, something that went beyond laughter or casual conversation. I could feel the shared understanding, the recognition that our connection had shifted, subtly but irrevocably. When the movie ended, we didn't rush to turn on the next one. Instead, we lingered on the couch, the soft glow from the lamp painting our faces in gentle light. Kevin shifted slightly closer, and I didn't move away. There was a kind of quiet courage in that simple act, acknowledging the tension without forcing it, allowing it to exist naturally, respectfully. "I like this," he said softly, voice low and intimate, almost hesitant. "Being here, like this." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion I hadn't expected to feel so strongly. "Me too," I said, and in that moment, it wasn't just about ice cream or Netflix or shared routines. It was about connection, about being seen and valued for exactly who I was, and feeling the same for him. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of quiet contentment. We talked, laughed, and sometimes simply sat together, letting the silence speak for us. There was a sense of discovery in every glance, every brush of our hands, every small gesture that had once been mundane, but now carried layers of meaning. I realized then that intimacy isn't always about grand declarations or dramatic moments. Sometimes it's about the slow accumulation of trust, the courage to share your presence, your attention, your quiet self with someone who truly sees you. By the time Kevin headed to his room that night, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the small, unassuming moments, for the laughter, for the glances that carried more meaning than words could ever capture. I understood, in a way I hadn't before, that connection is built slowly, tenderly, over the simplest of shared experiences. And as I drifted off to sleep, I realized that the ordinary days we share, the ice cream, the Netflix, the quiet evenings on the couch, were becoming something extraordinary, something I hadn't expected but now couldn't imagine being without. The next morning, sunlight spilled gently across the living room floor, painting long streaks of gold through the blinds. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee, wrapped in a shawl, when Kevin appeared in the doorway, his hair still tousled from sleep, and his eyes carrying that familiar warmth I'd come to cherish. For a moment, we just looked at each other, smiling softly without needing words. There was an ease now between us that hadn't existed before, a quiet understanding that the ordinary could be extraordinary when shared. "I was thinking," he started, leaning casually against the doorframe, "maybe we could have another ice cream day this weekend. Make it a little tradition." I laughed softly, the sound ringing comfortably in the quiet morning. "A tradition, huh? I think I can live with that." There was something tender about the suggestion, the way he framed it as a simple, joyful choice rather than a demand or plan. And in that, I realized how much our connection had deepened. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was about consistency, about sharing life's small pleasures with someone who truly cared. Later that afternoon, we followed through with the plan, heading out to the same ice cream parlor that had unexpectedly started all of this. The streets were familiar, yet everything felt a little more vibrant, a little more alive, because we were together. Kevin debated over flavors as he always did, and I watched him with affection, noticing the little quirks, the slight furrow of his brow when making a choice, the way he smiled when he finally settled on something. I realized I'd been missing these moments, the simple intimacy of being present with him in ordinary spaces. We sat in our usual spot by the window, and for the first time, I allowed myself to really notice the world around us. The sunlight glinting off the ice cream scoops, the hum of conversation from other customers, the soft rustle of leaves outside. But most of all, I noticed Kevin. The way his laughter mingled with mine, the subtle warmth in his gaze, the comfort in his presence. There was a profound recognition in those small details, a reminder that happiness often exists in the simplest of moments, quietly building without fanfare. After ice cream, we returned home and settled on the couch, blankets draped across our laps, and turned on the TV. The show we chose didn't matter. What mattered was the way we leaned into each other, shoulders brushing, hands occasionally touching as though by accident, but really by choice. There was a rhythm to our togetherness now, a silent agreement that presence itself could be intimate, that laughter, conversation, and even silence were enough to deepen a bond. Somewhere in the middle of the second episode, I caught myself studying him again, not in the way one studies a stranger, but in the way you notice the familiar nuances of someone you've come to care for profoundly. The softness of his smile, the way he tilted his head during something funny, the gentle way he let me talk while he listened fully. I felt a surge of gratitude for these ordinary, unassuming gestures that had gradually built a deep emotional connection between us. As the evening wore on, we didn't rush to do anything else. We didn't need to. There was no urgency, no pressure, just a shared awareness that what we had was enough. Kevin reached over to rest his hand near mine, and I let him, feeling a quiet thrill of comfort and closeness. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't fiery, but it was steady, tender, and deeply fulfilling. Finally, as the night drew to a close, and we tidied up the small remnants of popcorn and blankets, Kevin turned to me with a softness in his voice that made me pause. "Margaret, I don't say it enough, but I really appreciate this. All of it. The ice cream, the Netflix, just you being here." I felt the words settle in my chest like a gentle warmth. "I feel the same," I admitted, my voice soft but honest. "It's more than I expected, honestly, but it feels right." And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't fully realized before. Intimacy and connection aren't always about dramatic moments or sweeping declarations. Sometimes they're about laughter over ice cream, quiet evenings on the couch, shared glances, and the simple courage to be present with someone who values you. It's about letting small moments accumulate into something profound, allowing ordinary days to become extraordinary simply by choosing to be together. As Kevin headed off to his room, and I lingered a little longer on the couch, I let myself reflect on how much had changed in such a short time. What had started as a spontaneous suggestion for ice cream had grown into something much deeper, a mutual respect, emotional closeness, and a shared understanding that the simplest gestures can carry the greatest meaning. I realized that life's richness often comes from these quiet, unexpected moments. And as I finally rose to head to my room, I smiled softly, feeling a sense of gratitude and contentment that went beyond words. Sometimes happiness isn't found in grand adventures or monumental gestures. Sometimes it's found in ice cream in the afternoon, laughter shared in the living room, and the comforting presence of someone who truly sees you. And for the first time in a long time, I felt certain that these ordinary, gentle days, the little rituals we'd begun, the quiet closeness we shared, were enough. They were more than enough. They were everything.